You're on. Good afternoon, everybody. We are here with the writer Etgard Keret, one of the best acclaimed writers in Israel, with books in Portuguese, but books in 46 languages, a master on short stories. And it is an incredible pleasure to have us with Midrash. Midrash is our cultural center here in Rio. And we're doing several lives with people that were in the movie Immoral Soul. And I was very glad that you accepted to do this live with us. Mainly, I'll be very honest, it was very, very special for me when we met in December, a few months ago, before the world was totally different. And you took me to this incredible cafe, Hamania, I think it was called, right?
Yeah, Sunflower.
Yeah, exactly, which is in Basel, in Rehov Basel. And it was very special because it was very much what I expected to be your environment. This very intellectual kind of Tel Avivian cafe. And I'll be very honest, I when I read your stories, to me they're very much like the shorter versions are, the shorter stories are like an espresso, and the bigger ones are like cappuccino. Feels very much like a moment where I should sort of, when you have a coffee, is a moment you look at life, and coffee gives you a little high and you get into yourself. So to be very honest, I connect very much, not only that meeting that we had, but your stories with having a cappuccino during the day or during the routine of our lives. But so please, just want you to say hi to everybody.
No, so thank you. I also remember very well this conversation. You told me about your adventures and trips and going to Jordan, and everything. I remember everything that had happened. It was fascinating just listening to you. So I'm glad that we meet, even if it's through Zoom, that we meet again.
And we have it was published in O Globo. A very nice short story that you wrote, an article really about this moment that we're leaving with the virus and all the changes and uncertainty in the world. And you wrote three articles that you sent. One of them was published in O Globo, I want to start listening from you. How are you managing? How is it for somebody? And I could sense from the stories you wrote, the three stories that you sent. One was published. I hope the second one will be published soon here in Brazil. They were all about this sense of end of the world that we got. Actually, you have I think you did a very short one, which is the what is it called? The shortest of the three stories about going to a grocery. The olive, exactly. Where you do like a very, very short story, and you present all the feelings of the world coming to an end. Can you talk us about?
I want to say, for me, I must say that my experience of the coronavirus is not that the world comes to an end, only that the force of inertia that usually takes this kind of big ship that is our life, our government, our race, together, had been put to a stop. So actually, for me, when inertia stops, authenticity begins. So I think that dealing with the virus is not a happy experience, but I think it's, in a sense, an enlightening one. Because, when I write a story, if you ask me what my attempt is when I write a story and you read it, or whenever I exercise art, is to break that force of inertia. Is this idea that every day you do the same thing, you read the same paper, you give a coin to the same beggar, you go through your routine, and it's only when this routine is stopped that you ask yourself, what do I really want to do? Where would I want to go? So when I write a story, actually, my intention is to confuse the reader enough so he will get disoriented enough so he won't be able to do he won't be able to give his regular reaction or have his normal thought. So in a sense, I think that there is something about this experience that, again, it's scary, it's bad for health, it's bad for economy, but to be honest, it's very inspiring as an artist, to see this moment, to touch this kind of a existential point, and to also, when you see everything being put to a halt, you really can imagine the world taking a different course. It doesn't matter. Like, I mean, you could be an environmentalist and say, well, maybe we don't have to return to flying so much, or you could be a fascist and say, well, we don't really need this democracy. We can just tell people to stay home in a curfew and it works. It doesn't matter. You can take it to wherever your heart or ideologies lead you, but it kind of opens the scope of many alternative futures.
Totally, I totally agree. But it's interesting that you had from I got a sense from where you were also from these three stories that you wrote, and the three stories are very much about three very important non-fictional characters in your life. Because one story, this one about the grocery, where the lady is, it's about the son. She's hugging you like a son. Then you have one about your wife, a story where you want your wife to be strong in the case you die. And there's this very, very interesting story. I have to tell you, I sent that story to a very good friend of mine that was losing her husband. The opposite from another disease, not from corona. But it touched her very much. It was a mitzvah in many ways, because somehow you talked about that important relationship between couples, where there's so many feelings. At the same time, you expect the other one to be somehow, it helps you not to have them suffering too much. So I see you're dealing with wife, and then the other one is about your father. So you have the three most non-fictional characters that you bring in your books. 7 Good Years, and
yeah.
So
in the 7 Good Years also, my son is very dominant. But here in those stories, right? I think and I was a child of Holocaust survivors. Both my parents are already dead. My mother passed away only 8 months ago or something like this, and and for me, I think that when I grew up with my parents and my 2 other siblings, it didn't feel so much like a family as it felt like we were partisans hiding in the forests of Tel Aviv. It was just this idea that we are people who are committed to each other, who are loyal to each other, who love each other. But this kind of idea of hierarchy of a father telling his son what to do did not exist. It just existed as if it was what you have inside your home and what you have outside. And the idea is that my parents were there to help me achieve what I wanted, meaning that if I didn't want to go to school, they would cover for me and say I was ill. If I, if I would want to pick a fight with a child, my mother will coach me where to kick him that it will hit the hardest. And I think that when you grow up with your parents like this, I think that the ability of letting go of them is much more difficult, because they have many roles. They are not just parents. They're parents, they're friends, they're your children. They're the universe in a sense.
Do you feel that you felt compelled to write about this time bring those three characters, each one in one story, as a connection to this moment.
Yeah, well, for me, the first thought I had with the coronavirus was really some kind of gratefulness for the fact that I didn't have to go through this period with my elderly parents, because my mother was not lucid in the last few months of her life, and the idea of going through the corona time with somebody who doesn't understand what the situation is was very, very depressing. But I think that there was something that my fear and sadness were for all the elderly people in the world. So it sent me very much back to my relationship with my parents.
And what about the sense of finitude of death? Because I think in your writing you have you bring in a very special way the presence of the thought of death. In a very like routine kind of, it's always like sometimes there was this thought about that comes in within the certain story, but it's more like a thought. I think very much like we have many times, we probably think about that many times during the day, but it's a very special way of treating it. It's like you bring it as if it is always there.
Well, maybe this has to do with my biography, because as I said, both my parents were Holocaust survivors. My mother lost both her father and mother and brother during the war. My father lost his sister. And after that, his father got murdered in Israel, in his grocery store. And my best friend died during my army service. I saw many people die around me, and I think that there was also something about my parents, especially my mother, that she always wanted to prepare me for this situation, that that people can die. I remember that once I think my brother had a birthday and we went to a restaurant and the food wasn't good. And I complained about the food. And my mother said to me, look around you, look at all the people in the restaurant. Look at all those people, each of them eating from their own plate. Nobody tries to take the food from your plate. Each of them has a knife, but nobody tries to stab you. Let's agree, you and me, that it's a good day, And I think that there was something of somebody who lost all her family, who grew up in very tough orphanages, that basically she had this kind of joy of living because she didn't take anything for granted. And being a child, I realized that that she grew at inside some social order that in 1 minute disappeared. And I realized that that when I looked around me all the time, I understood that the realities that I live in could change and break in a second. So in a sense, when something like a coronavirus comes, I think mentally I'm much more prepared than the average person, because I all the time accept to the world to stand on its head, for things to behave in a different way, and again I think it's something that it's both anxious and hopeful. This idea is that we are not living in one world where you can predict the end, but we are living in many worlds that will keep changing and presenting themselves.
And I love the way your literary style, and where you deal with reality in a very special way. Many times when I'm reading your stories, I know there are stories, but many times I picture as being yourself, the person. It's hard for me to take you out of the picture and see it as fiction, and I love the way that you're always very, very contemplative, like looking around and sort of depicting things, behaviors, bringing into your thought. So it's a chain, a very interesting chain of reality and fiction, we have some. My father passed away last year, and my mother is very sort of sick now, and she's having trouble understanding things. She gets very confused with what's is her imagination and what's real. So and it's interesting. We get very scared with this when we don't have control over this flow.
So I must say something about my mother, that it was funny, but when she lost her lucidness, like the default reaction of anybody that you tell them that a person lost his lucidness, people say it's worse than dying, it's hell, it's horrible. But I think that in most of the time, it actually kind of excused her of all her Holocaust trauma and of all her anxieties, and it gave her almost some kind of a Buddhist quality of living in the present. It's, I remember that when I would come to her, the doctor would always say that I should challenge her memory, So I come and she smiles and she hugs me, and then I say to her, "Do you know who I am?" And my mother looks at me and she smiles and she said, "Well, I know that you love me, and I know that I love you. Isn't this enough?" And there was something so beautiful in it that even I think that my problem is that I think that I see most experiences as ambiguous. Some of them are ambiguous and more positive. Some of them are ambiguous and more negative. But all the time, there are those kind of things that I'm told that this is a good thing and this is a bad thing, and I always like to say that when I have what you call a bad period, I say I have a difficult period, because I never experience this as bad, because I feel all the time that this kind of package that I get, there is always something good and something bad in it. It's just a question of what quantities.
So one makes 7 good years. Is there any 7 bad years in your life?
Well, it's funny because the 7 good years basically talks about the 7 years between the birth of my son and the death of my father. So it was like the gift of being a father to my son while being a child to my father. And the number of 7, of course, threw me to the story of Joseph, and the Pharaoh dreams of the 7 fat cows and the 7 skinny cows. And what happened was that 7 years after I published this book, my mother died. So, so I don't know. And it's funny because I always had a joke with my mother. My mother, I mostly write fiction, but my mother was especially moved by my only non-fiction book, because it was about her and about my father. And she said to me, "When are you going to write another non-fiction book?" And I said to her, "Probably when you die, because it takes a dead parent to write." And we would always laugh about it. And now, when she died, I'm not even sure that I'll be able to write a book about her. Maybe not as a non-fiction. I have some idea to write her story as fiction. I can tell you roughly what the idea is. Is it interesting?
Sure.
So I've thought about writing a story about a person who's, let's say, about my age or even a little older, that he takes care of his mother, who begins to go through dementia, and basically he remembers his childhood, and through his childhood his mother was always very omnipotent. Like, she could say to him, let's say, if there's an exam tomorrow, don't worry, I'll make sure that the exam won't take place. And the next morning he would come and his teacher would have a stroke, or something like this. And he really believed that his mother controls everything. And basically, parallelly, as he takes care of his mother who's being demented, and he has some kind of anger that his mother kind of always told him that she's omnipotent. So as he takes care of her, changing her diapers and cleaning things, the world around him suddenly goes through a turmoil, a little bit like we go now, viruses, tsunamis and stuff. And as his mother becomes more demented, and as she dies, the world becomes more chaotic. And as his mother dies, he realizes that his mother was God, and now that she's dead, he's left in a godless world.
Very
Great
Jewish.
story. I don't know if I'll be able to pull it off, but this is the idea I had in my mind.
I like it. I like it. I like it. I think it's very, very, you know, it's interesting that there are 7 years since you wrote that book, and maybe it's not the 7 bad years, but it's different. Maybe also we get older, and the expectations of good, bad, you know, become different. And but do you work like that? Is that the way you do it? You go from ideas. How do you work with the stories? Do you go from non-fictional situations that you encounter, and then you create a fictional?
Yes, I think most of my stories come from some kind of a place where I try to find a coherent way to explain to myself what I'm feeling. So, for example, I'm just kind of saying, I don't know, if I come and visit you, and I have a crush on your wife, but I'm happily married, and you're my friend, you know, so I would feel confused about my emotion. So I could sit down and write a story about an elephant who goes on a diet, and then he finds himself locked in a bakery full of cakes. And he has to deal with the fact that his desires and what he knows right are not the same. So by writing this story, I can explain to myself what I'm feeling in a given moment, you know. And I think that, you know, when I began studying, I studied the philosophy of science, you know, Karl Popper. And Karl Popper always said that the advantage that human beings had with science is that instead of endangering their life, they could endanger their hypothesis. So, for example, if I say, you know, I think there is gravity, I can throw a rock off a cliff and see if it falls and deduce that I'll die, and I don't have to jump. And I think that when you write stories, it's many times the same. It's like there are many things that you yearn for or you're afraid of, and by writing a story about them, then you can have a sense of this experience without kind of taking the ultimate risk of going through those things. So, by the way, all my life I wrote stories about children who lose their parents, as if there was something about writing those stories that would help me deal with my anxiety or prepare me for that moment.
I love the way you do it, because I always have a sense there are several levels on I feel that there is like thinking on when you're writing, and it's very descriptive of situations, emotions. It really feels like the world of emotion that you're just describing, because what comes up, there are several layers that I sometimes think. He's thinking, he's saying it to himself, which is sometimes we say things aloud to ourselves, which is somehow different from thinking. You know, it's another level. You know, and
when I write, I speak out loud. Not necessarily what I write, but when I write, I always speak out loud.
Exactly. But everything, even in the mind, you know, not even having to speak aloud, you speak aloud to yourself, and also there is another realm, which is the realm of imagination. You know, and they're all being somehow glued together. And I think emotion is basically what you say.
Yeah, I think that for me, art, the way the art that I love, kind of submits to a subjective experience. It doesn't care about what really happens. It cares about how it feels like. And I think that when you are totally subjective, you know, I can look at my rabbit, you know, I have a pet rabbit. I can look at my rabbit and imagine or feel he's my father. And then I can say to my rabbit, you know, I miss you, you know. And my rabbit, you know, go and eat some lettuce and sits in the corner. And I say, okay, let's talk about it some other time. But when I do it, you know, the feeling is that I'm communicating with my father, you know. So if I write a story, then let's say in my latest collection, I wrote a story about a girl that their parents are separated and their father abandons them, and they find a rabbit, and they believe they can't accept the fact that their father abandons them, so they think that their father transformed into a rabbit, you know? So, so like, I guess for readers, they say, oh, it's imagination, but for me, it's basically kind of a way of kind of sharing these kind of feelings that I have, that I've always kind of communicated with dead people through animals. And if you ask me scientifically, no, I don't think that the rabbit is my father. But if you ask me emotionally, then I say, when I say this to the rabbit, I actually feel better that I shared it with the rabbit, because it feels as if I think that many times, I don't know, even people, let's say people who believe in monotheistic religion, they still like to go to a synagogue or a church, they still like to make it concrete. So for me, many times there is something that can be obscure or abstract, and I turn it into something concrete that is not, it's not objectively judged. It just kind of subjectively serves me.
So where would you talk to God? Where would be places that would be on that fictional dialogue?
Well, first of all, I usually talk to God when I take baths, when I'm in the bath, when I lie in the bath, I think, because I think that, to deal with the issue with God, I think it's such a wide perspective. It's so much to carry that you cannot do it while you're writing emails, But if you're in a good bath, it smells well, and with a nice foam, then I can talk to God, and I feel for me, sometimes in this sensation, I feel as if humanity is some kind of a reality show that God is looking into, that he's watching says, oh, in this episode, Edgar's mother dies, and he tells a sad story. So I have this kind of feeling of him being a spectator, and sometimes I try to convince him to be more involved and to do stuff, and sometimes I can criticize him for doing stuff that they seem to me like, that I say, I know it's going to bring you a lot of rating, but come on, be nice. But I think that with my discussion with God, I talk a lot about my life or humanity as if it's kind of a reality show or a movie or a story, and I debate with him what would be a better ending, or what I would recommend as a turning point, or why this pandemic thing shouldn't go to the next season. It's good, it was interesting, we learned stuff, but we should stop it and go somewhere else, So it's very much, it feels very, it's always very professional, I think, when I talk to God, because, if I get emotional and I cry and stuff, it could be embarrassing. But I always talk to him, I say, like, you write your scripts, I also write, I'm not as good as you, I cannot write the Bible, but I think that right now you should go totally different direction.
Okay, I'll make it more rabbinic. You talk to God at the mikveh.
At the mikveh, yeah.
Anyway, I remember that in our interview, you told us a very interesting situation where the Minister of Education asked you to compromise one of your stories about the piggy bank, changing it from a pig. They wanted to present it to religious schools, so they wanted it to become a cow. A cow bank. And you said something very beautiful, that you couldn't compromise in areas of your fiction, because that's your authentic.
Yeah. I think my feeling was that, I think being a child of Holocaust survivors, I very, very early on, without my parents asking for me, I realized that my parents had suffered so much, so I was willing to compromise many of my yearnings if I thought it would make them happy. For example, until this day, I usually don't eat desserts, because when I would eat a main dish, and when my mother would give my siblings desserts, I would ask for another of the dish. I would see that it makes her happy. So I would keep doing it to make her happy. And and now even after she died, I'm kind of doctrinated not to eat dessert. So I think that all the time I had this kind of oversensitivities to other people and what they want. And in that sense, there was something about fiction that suddenly it was this great release that I can write a story, and in my story I can burn down this house, destroy the universe, kill all the animals. It doesn't matter. Nothing's gonna happen. So this idea that you go to a place where you don't have to take with you your guilt or your responsibility seemed wonderful. So when people said to me, "How about you change your story?" I said, "No, no, no. In life, you can ask me. If you ask me, I put a yarmulke. If you ask me, I do anything you ask me. But when I write my stories, this is the place where I can just be myself and look and see what I really feel like. Not the way I act, but the way that I am."
I think that's the richness of your stories, and there is a sense of intimacy that it's very, very sacred, and
Well, in the biblical time, I think that there were those places called the safe cities. That's how they call it,
we call it
or cities of refuge.
yeah.
And basically, it was this idea. I think if you killed somebody by mistake and the family wanted vengeance, if you were able to go to this city, they were unable to hurt you there, and they were not allowed to. And I have a feeling that for me, I feel the same for a art, in that sense that many times in my stories I have a courage to write things that I would never say in my life. The idea is that if it's in a story, then I'm excused, I'm allowed. I will not get punched for it because it's just a story. If I'm not allowed to be truthful, even if I'm kind of a disocial or I don't know, anarchistic or a misanthrope, if I'm not allowed to express that in fiction, then where am I allowed to express it? And and I feel also that many times, let's say talks like we have are talks that for our extensions of that. It's like I think that in this kind of a literary conversation, I would say statistically, I would be more honest than in real life. It's like if we meet in real life and you ask me how is my haircut, I would say, "Oh, great, Nilton, this is wonderful." And if you ask me in an event, I could say to you, "Horrible," and I would feel it's okay because we are now talking art. If you don't want to hear what I really think about your haircut, don't talk to me about art and literature. Meet me outside of this zone, and I will tell you whatever you want to hear. But when we enter this, we're both committed to some kind of a honesty or truthfulness.
Yeah, there's this sense, I think it's very biblical too, is the sense of na'aseh v'nishma, that you first you do and then you sort of think about the reality. You're more like present than in the non-fictional reality.
Yeah, I think when you say na'aseh v'nishma, it's for me it takes me to this place that the idea is that sometimes I taught in the U.S. Creative writing in universities, and many times there is an attitude there that sees literature as craft, as if like basically you're in control and you're gonna construct a story the way that you construct a bridge or a submarine. But for me, the idea is that that the story is this kind of a slippery creature, that runs around your apartment, and writing a story is grabbing it by its tail and holding tight when it drags you in the course that it wanted to go. I always say to my students, I say to them, if the story that you write is the one that you've intended to write before you sat down, if you execute exactly what you wanted, I say to them, you didn't write a story. You built an IKEA furniture. That's what you did. A good story, by definition, should always surprise you. A good story should always be smarter than you. It should always see something in your blind spot. It should say to you, "You have some tahini here." The story should, after reading your story, you should be in a vantage point that you were not in when you sat down to write it.
So how do you manage, for example, to bring some political or activist kind of thought within such a realm without making it political, without making it lose that balance?
So I must say that, sometimes I write op-eds and they could be very political, but there is something almost insulting for me to sit down and write an op-ed, because I think that what's special in art, that it can take the most simple situation, I don't know, a mother breastfeeding her baby, a father and son go fishing, all those things that you say, what do I have to say about it? And present it as very ambiguous and complicated and with many levels, and that's what art is about. You take something simple and you say it's not so simple. But when you write an op-ed, it's the opposite. You take the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and you say, oh, it's very simple. We have to do this, we have to do that. And so for me, it's almost kind of betraying writing to write these kind of pieces. And when I write my fiction, again, I never write a story hoping that the reader would take it in a certain way. I write a story very much like, it's a little bit like a Rorschach stain. I want it to remind something to the reader. I want him to feel moved by it. I want him to take him to a place, but I don't want to define this place. So I think that, when you write a political story, for example, for me, it's a little bit like an oxymoron. And there is also something about it. It's like, if you've read the Immanuel Kant's Ethics, so Kant talks a lot about the fact that, that a real ethical behavior, it's a behavior in which you don't expect anything in the world. You don't expect the world to be grateful for you. For example, if I help an elderly lady to cross the street, it's an ethical action. If I help her do it when I see my boss watching me from his window, it's not ethical anymore. I just want my boss to think that I'm a good worker. So I think the same for literature. The moment that you want to leverage literature, the moment that you say, I'm going to write a story that will make people understand that killing other people is bad, then first of all, you could say, how come nobody wrote this story before? Because people keep killing each other, maybe it's impossible. But the second thing is, the moment that you do it, your relationship with the readers stops being earnest, because you become manipulative. You're not telling him a story. You're trying to make him choose A instead of B, And that is something that I don't know, it kind of gives me the creeps. They say, no, I was not giving the ability to do this, for that, It's like I'm saying, okay, I may be a good kisser, but I wouldn't kiss people for $10, So I'm a good writer, maybe, but I wouldn't want to use my good writing to make people vote for a different political party. I would write an op-ed, because that would be my commitment as a citizen. But at least in the op-ed, there is this honest disclosure that, man, I'm trying to bullshit you to do what I want, This is the honest disclosure. Everybody who picks this piece of paper knows that that's the deal.
I understand. It's when there's somebody observing, and the observant changes the capacity of being in that sacred place. At the same time, you probably have to think about somebody reading it. How do you place the reader? Not as an observant that you want to please.
Well, for me, in the process, when I write a story, I always keep in my mind that I say, I write the story for myself. I write the story because I want to know what's going to happen in the end, And I always say to myself, this is the agreement with myself, after finishing the story, I'm going to read it and see if I have the guts to publish it, And I must say that I've yet to find a story that I didn't have the guts to publish. But the thought that I say to myself, what, this could be maybe just a story for yourself, I think gives me a lot of freedom, to write characters that are dislikable in a way that I'm dislikable, It allows me to put out my thought. For example, I don't really like PC writing, political correctness writing. And I write, sometimes my characters, they say nasty things in the stories that I totally don't believe in. But I always say to myself, but I found those nasty things inside my mind. They were there. And the moment that I put it outside, I say, okay, this could be a story about a racist, or this could be a story about a chauvinist, and there is this side of me saying, I wouldn't want people to think that I'm able to even think those kind of thoughts. But somehow I always kind of, okay, the stories, I say, okay, if I wrote them and if I read them and if after reading them I still talk to myself, I hope that my readers will also speak to me after reading them.
I love some of your images are incredible. I think that we're talking about this writing for yourself and all that. I think when you talk about your first article, your first story, that you show it to your brother, and he was walking the dog, and at the end he asks if he can pick the dog's dog with your story. He asked you if you have
he didn't even ask, he just did it naturally. He picked a piece of dog crap with it while speaking to me about the story, as if he was connecting with it. Yeah.
I think that's
he said, do you have another copy of it? And I said, yes. So he just picked the dog shit with it and kept talking about how he liked in the second part that things happened. And there was no connection between this piece of paper and my story, which was the biggest lesson I've ever got. It's like, they always say in the place where they burn books, they burn people, right? So I say, but if they burn books, I prefer them to burn the books after reading them. Because after you read the book, you can burn it. It's okay, just a piece of paper.
I think that's an incredible image for letting go of that attachment and really creating something that is you, and it's in the world, but it's not that physical thing.
Yeah.
And also,
but imagine, talking about book burning. Imagine that there would be a law that you can burn a book if you read it. You have to take kind of a test, by the government. They ask you what happened in the first chapter, and did the girl fall in love on this guy, and if you answer them, you can burn it. I think it would be amazing. I think that all those, people who try to force their ideas on others, on the process of kind of enforcing it, would have to suck into themselves really? all the other people's ideas. It's really.
It's like Hillel used to do. Hillel was very much like that. You can learn, and then you can do whatever you want with that learning, but you have to learn first. That will change. That will change you in a way. But the other image that I think has to do a lot with what we're going through is you have this image of that you present. You saw somebody with a newspaper under the arm and with a coffee in his hand, trying to drink the coffee, and the newspaper falling, and repeating that several times, and as a metaphor for the world we live. What is your feeling about that metaphor? Well, I think it's incredible because it shows some awkwardness that we have with life, with reality, where we insist in repeating several things that don't work. So how do you look at the world now from that metaphor?
No, so first of all, what I think is in the time of the coronavirus, it was very difficult, because if life is some kind of an obsessive compulsive behavior, then basically the quarantine stopped people from obsessing the ways that they were used to obsessing. They had to find new ways. They couldn't just go through the motions. They were kind of pushed outside of their comfort zone. And it's really, really interesting because, I've met many people, I've met people that found this period the most depressing one. But I also, let's say, my son began drawing and learning animation, And in a sense, before that, he would refuse to go to study anything. But out of being imposed, not going out and being with his friends and stuff, and suddenly discovered something new. And some people just say it's depressing, it's horrible, it's just bad. It's because I think that usually in life we can take a passive stance and still live our life. We go to work, we drop the kid, we go to the aunt, and here this situation imposes on us to be active. And being active could be something difficult but liberating, or also something that we will never achieve. If we are demanded to be active, we will just freeze.
So the non-fictional world and the fictional world came closer.
I think for me that the non-fictional world and the fictional world, they're always kind of the same. For me, the fictional world is kind of an allegorical aspect of the non-fictional one. And there was this kind of feeling that, for example, let's say as a writer, what I'm expected to do is to wake up in the morning and sit next to my computer or a page and write. That's what I'm supposed to do. But usually my life are not like that, because I have to go and do all kinds of errands and deal with all kinds of people and give all kinds of lectures. And suddenly comes this coronavirus 19, and it imposes a writer's life on me because I have nowhere else to go to. It's like God saying, no, you're going to sit and write now, And it's funny, and also the situation kind of gets me inspired. And then at some moment I say, I feel guilty because I feel that because of all this horrible thing happening in the world, I get to write stories, It reminds me a beautiful poem by Raymond Carver. And Raymond Carver talks in this poem about how a car runs down his little daughter's dog, and how he buried this dog, and how he wrote a poem about this dog. And the poem was so beautiful that he was almost happy that the dog died. And this is always this kind of, like I'm saying, that art is guiltless. In art, in a story, you can kill, rape, I don't know, but you say it didn't really happen. But the guilt that comes is actually the fact that art gives you many times joy for things that are really just pain and sorrow. And when you do this kind of transformation, you take not necessarily your pain, a neighbor's pain, or or a friend's pain, and turn it into something that actually gives you joy, then you feel kind of guilty, as if you say, oh, like maybe I'm almost happy that this bad thing had happened.
Okay, we're coming close to our time. Unfortunately, we could really, it passes so quickly talking to you. Thank you so much. I have a few questions. I have one that I cannot leave out, and then I'll ask a couple of questions that have several. We won't have the time. Will you be writing about changes in Israeli culture because of this crisis? Will we have Israelis being less? I always have trouble in Israel with people not keeping distance, and after social distancing, will that change anything?
I think in theory, like I would like to say yes, but knowing Israel as well enough, I don't think it's going to change. And actually, I'm kind of happy that it will never change, I mean, not that I'm particularly like the fact that sweaty people hug me all the time, but I think that it's kind of part of our identity. It's like the fact that I'm hairy. I don't like it, but it's me. I wouldn't want at this stage to lose my fur.
Okay, we have a few questions. People are asking you if you think that Jews have created God, or that God have created the Jews, which was the way? Are we the fiction? Are we the fiction of God? Of God our fiction?
I could imagine this like an Escher painting, of one hand painting the other. I really think that, I think that maybe God invented us and we invented him, and we're both kind of codependent, and I must say that, that the fact that that God invented Jews, just shows that he has a sense of humor.
Definitely, definitely. What is the other one? And what about the sin? The same kind of question. If the Jews didn't create sin, what is what is the status of sin?
Well, there is something about sin. I remember something that always kind of bothered me as a child was what this idea of like if we were created by God, you know, and then God created us with a tendency and a wish to sin, you know, and basically He left us there so we will wrestle with our wish to sin, and then we will not sin, you know. So I thought to myself, you know, if this is not a TV show, then I never understood the incentive. You know, I mean, you know, again, you have the paradox here of like, if God created us, then probably He knew how we would decide. But you say no, but He created us with free will. Okay, but this free will, when He created it, there is the kind of free will that will take us good or to the good side and the bad side. And by the way, according to the Bible, God didn't want us to eat from the forbidden fruit that kind of gave us this knowledge, and maybe if you would want, you know, the freedom to choose. Don't know what gets God going, but I think he's a very complex
But
figure.
you know, in the film and that we did was basically that idea that you should not start the Bible with a bad story. So there's another reading from that, from what happened there. It wasn't just a story about corruption, you know. It was a story about really not doing what you mentioned. I remember that in the movie. It's there. It's a beautiful part when you talk about your father, and you present your father as somebody very transgressive. That's the word I use in the movie, where he would not be happy if he would have become a very successful doctor and have a beautiful house and wife. That would be not enough. And you had this beautiful image of your father saying, sort of, you step over my shoulders. There's like a wall here, and I don't know what's on the other side. You jump and do that. So maybe God was very much, your father was very much like God in that sense.
Yeah, it could be. It's a, you know, for me, I remember my first reading of the Bible, and it was in elementary school, and you write you read the first chapter, you know, in the beginning there was da, and the moment I wrote it, I thought to myself, what does it mean in the beginning? There must have been something before that, but I guess that this is the part that God doesn't want to tell, you know. And for me, I think a child of Holocaust survivor reading the Bible, I said to myself, the same way that my father or my mother suppressed the Holocaust, then maybe God suppresses his traumatic past. That maybe creating this kind of universe is basically, you know, he doesn't even want to tell us what happened before. It was so bad, you know. So as a child, I always felt that it was that as if God had this kind of infinite attempt of creating the universe, and in the end, it always ended badly. And every time He created a race, He gave them a Bible, and every time it was written in the beginning. But maybe we are His kind of zillionth attempt.
True. You know that there is some Hasidic reading that says that Eve was the one that really went to Adam and said, "What is that God expects from us? Living in this paradise, this is the comfort zone reality." So she was the one that told him, you know, that cannot be it. There must be something else. There must be something beyond that wall. And then she didn't. It wasn't really a scene. Was just the most grandiose moment of humanity.
But I want to say something about that. If you think about it, basically before Adam and Eve ate from the apple, they were not really religious in a sense, because they didn't make, because the idea of being religious is to make a choice. But before that, they were like animals. They were very natural, you know. So in a strange sense, in this kind of reading, God didn't want them to become religious. You know, it was really like kind of taking a step away from his attention, his intention, because he just wanted them to be. But they insisted on kind of having this kind of reflexive point of view that had imposed religion on them. So for me, I could also imagine a God that he's like this kind of, I don't know, rock and roll singer that hates the fact that fans run after him and ask for an autograph, you know. So just leave it, come on, you know.
I actually, the best thing is this idea that you have about autographs, of doing those fictional autographs, crazy autographs. That's amazingly creative. I really enjoyed that. There is a question here. Lenisa is asking about solitude, that it's so present in your writing. How do you mean it?
Well, for me, I think that writing is a way of dealing with solitude or confronting with solitude, because I think that as a child I was very anxious, and being anxious kind of made me many times kind of take a step back from life, not go to places that seem dangerous, not to do things that seem difficult, you know, and my ability of kind of dealing with isolating myself was both by reading books and living in places in my mind, and also by making stories, because when you make a story, you are not alone. You are with the characters in the story. You are in the middle of life. You always have a purpose. You always have a wish. You can get disappointed or surprised, but basically, in an instant, there is a full life around you. And when I write a story, while I write, I really cannot differentiate I'm saying in the deep way, the difference between kind of making up a story and living an experience. It kind of feels the same. It's like, you know, for me, when a character dies, I can cry, you know. It's not I say, oh, I just made it up.
You know, we unfortunately, we're gonna in Instagram, we're gonna be done in 1 minute. So I really want to thank you for taking this time and being here in Brazil. Very meaningful for us. Know that you have readers here that love your work. Please do take the time of this, this quarantine to write more. And I think it's a great idea that you do another nonfiction on something that is so fertile as your mother and your relationship with her. So thank you so much for having this cappuccino together here.
Shalom.
Shalom. Go to.
Bye bye.